It was a boring summer night. I just finished my school year and had a lot of time on my hands. My days were spent skateboarding with my friends at the park. Skating was my passion at the time, and virtually all of my free time was spent doing it. But some evenings, however, I found myself bored and at home. I was never much of a gamer, so watching my favorite series was my favorite pastime. But let's face it, even your favorite activities get boring after several days of doing them. But one night in particular, I was thinking back on a conversation with a friend. My friend used to go on the website Omegle and try and prank people. He often would pretend like he was a girl by putting on very well-made makeup by his sister. Due to his young face, he looked like an actual girl. This rather effective catfishing got some really funny reactions. Boys on the other side of the screen would sometimes get aroused and compliment him. After toying with them a little, he would reveal his real gender by showing his manly, deep voice. These stories my friend told were hilarious, so much so that I decided to try out Omegle myself. At first, I was genuinely bent on meeting people online and seeing where it would take me. I was also expecting to hopefully meet some cute girls from my area. I know it seems cliche and over-romanticized, but I was a lonely man during this time. I'd never been in a legitimate relationship before. I wanted to fall in love with someone. I wanted to care about someone. Sadly, Omegle disappointed me rather quickly. Every time I tried to make any conversation with someone, they would skip me. Sometimes I couldn't even say a word. I came to the conclusion that maybe they were only looking for girls on this page. After all, every other dude had their pants down and were showing their privates to the camera. I was shocked and disgusted at first, but after 10 times of seeing something, you tend to get used to it. But at this point, it was 11 p.m. I decided to skip the last few people and just call it a day. But when I was about to do this, I encountered something I really didn't expect to see on my screen. The first thing I noticed was a large table with guns spread across it. Behind it, a weird-looking man. My heart rate started rising. I counted around 6 guns on the table. What was happening? Why would someone just show their guns like this on Omegle? They had to be fake, right? While I asked myself this, I focused my attention to the man. His room behind him was pitch dark. I couldn't see anything but him and the guns. The man was sitting still behind his table, eyes wide open. He had long black hair, and his whole outfit was dark too. He was in some sort of goth-type outfit. Even the skin around his eyes were painted black, almost like some sort of clown or Joker, but with grayscale. His lack of movement was starting to play on my anxiety, but somehow I waited for him to start the conversation. After a long and awkward minute of staring at each other, he finally started to type something on his keyboard under his table. Curiosity would be an understatement to what I felt right now. I was really intrigued for some reason. What could this guy possibly be typing? The text read, "Hello, I choose you to choose my destiny. We will be playing the notorious game called Russian Roulette, but this version's a little tweaked. On my table here, I have 6 guns. 2 of them are fully loaded, and the rest are empty. You will decide which gun's trigger I should pull aiming to my head. We will do this twice, and if I survive, I win. If not, you win." I laughed out loud reading this message. I'm no expert, but the guns were clearly fake. He was trying really hard to make me believe in this prank. Thinking back to one of my friend's stories on Omegle, he also mentioned people doing stuff like this. So at this point, I immediately knew this was an act. And from my angle, the guns didn't seem glossy enough at all to look like actual metal. They seemed like they were made of plastic for some reason. Knowing all this, I proceeded. I was bored and I wanted to see how far this guy would take it. Would he actually fake his own death? So I looked through the guns and decided to pick the one on the left. I messaged him this and he picked that gun. I was more excited and intrigued than freaked out. I was curious to see how far this guy would take his performance, if you will. He then showed the gun to the camera and clearly showed all the details a real gun would have. I could finally see the glossiness of the gun's metal and was really impressed with the realism of the gun. It must have been some sort of movie-level prop. Despite all this, I never in my wildest dreams considered the possibility that these would be real guns. He then stuck the gun to his head and closed his eyes, slowly pulling on the trigger. The gun just made a click. At this point, I was 100% sure that these were either really good fakes or they were all empty real ones. I was eager to pick the next gun, desperate to show the man that I didn't fall for his stupid prank. We then repeated the process. He asked me to pick one gun, and I picked the one in the middle this time. He then started to shake like a leaf. He put the gun up to his head, but this time, it was a lot different. He was still quivering, and he seemed like he wanted to try and put the gun down for a second. He was hesitating to pull the trigger. It took him around 2 minutes to finally gather the courage. I didn't even blink or flinch at this time. I was just amazed at the man's acting. His shakes and quivers looked almost genuine. But then, it happened. He pulled the trigger, and I could see his head blowing off with a lot of blood spraying around the room. A few drops sprayed on the camera. This thankfully blurred the horrible sight of whatever remained of his lower head. But even through the blood, I could see his muscles start to twitch and spasm. After a few more seconds, they stopped moving. I immediately looked away from my computer and closed my eyes. I kept telling myself that there was no way this could be real, but I was starting to believe that he wasn't pretending. The blood looked too real, and there was no way this man could have faked blowing his head off. This looked more realistic than AAA movies. This couldn't have been an edit. It had to be real. I kept closing my eyes and opening them a few times to see if his body was still there. My anxiety attack was at its peak. Part of me was just waiting for the man to start moving again, hoping it was some sort of 3D animation. The other was facing reality. But his body never moved. I decided to stay on the page as long as I can to see if the body will at least shift a little. Maybe someone from his house will enter the room and quickly rush him to a hospital. I was devastated, but at this point, I started to feel sick to my stomach. I rushed to the bathroom and started throwing up. I passed a good 20 minutes before I came back into my room, slowly opening my laptop. I really hoped it was only just hallucinations or something, maybe a dream. I just wanted to wake up from this nightmare. But then it hit me. I just witnessed someone taking their own life. When I looked back at the screen with horror, the image was still the same. He couldn't be pretending this long. Now I knew for sure that this couldn't be a prank. I came across the idea that I could yell into my microphone or maybe alarm someone at his apartment or house. Try and unmute myself and see if that'd do anything. Maybe someone was around and could help him. But unfortunately, in my panic, I clicked on the wrong button. This instantly closed the chat window with the man. I tried to reopen Omegle, but at this point, Omegle already assigned me a new stranger. I decided to try and just somehow sleep, hopefully erasing it from my memory. I obviously couldn't do this. I couldn't help the man anyways. I didn't know his name or location. After about a week, I buried the memory deep in the back of my mind. I never told my parents. I never told anyone for that matter. I was just too ashamed, too afraid, too embarrassed. I still occasionally think about the incident after 4 years. Maybe if I just believed him, maybe if I just listened to him, I could have somehow talked him out of it. But I can't change the past. I need to try and forget about this. There's nothing I can do. People often ask me why I'm so paranoid about going online, especially in this day and age. What I'm about to tell you should answer that perfectly. This story took place around 3 years ago. I still feel surreal talking about it. The whole ordeal felt like it happened over a blur, but I can somehow remember it to the smallest details. It was a Friday night, and while I normally would be with some friends, I instead found myself at home. It was an odd time of year. My friends seemed to be either busy or sick. This wasn't also terrible though. I do occasionally enjoy having some time to myself, and it was a good time to sort of just relax on my computer. I naturally hopped on my computer and started surfing the web. It wasn't productive, but it did help me unwind a lot. After an hour or two, however, my boredom started to take its peak. I was running out of things to do, websites to go on, but I recalled a website my friends and I used to go on a while back. Omegle had been around for a good time now, but I hadn't gone on it in a while. I felt the whole concept was a bit silly at my age, but with all of this, my boredom was getting to me. I said hell with it and decided to open a new tab. I opened Omegle, and to my expectations, nothing much had changed at all. It was the usual meet random people via text or video. It didn't really have the same thrill, quote unquote, as a few years ago, but I'm not 100% sure why. After scrolling through some people, however, I was in all honesty still bored. But as I was about to hit escape, I was greeted by a man. The man had an almost infectious smile. His teeth were almost completely showing, and it honestly threw me off guard at first. Needless to say, he seemed really happy about something, and this intrigued me for whatever reason. Not only was I trying to not ruin this man's extremely good mood, I genuinely found it interesting seeing a smile like that these days. Most people just seem so unhappy. "What's up, man?" I politely said, trying to match the man's energy. There was a slight pause in our interaction, and then the smiling man then said in a cool and alluring voice, "Why, hello there, stranger. Normally I'd ask how you're doing, but you seem like you're having a great day," I replied jokingly. The man chuckled to himself and continued, "Life is too short to be unhappy. You never know when things could take a turn. Is it worth looking back and only remembering yourself frowning?" That took a rather deep turn, but I suppose the guy was right. There's no point in sulking constantly. "Now, would you like to meet a friend?" the man abruptly said. Sure, I guess," I replied. The smiling man then brought out a person in a mask. The person seemed tall and skinny, and the mask was a blank white one. The only thing I could see on the masked person was part of their eyes. But that wasn't even the scary part. The person in the mask seemed awfully limp, essentially the opposite of the smiling man. "Now, there's no need to be afraid," the smiling man said, acknowledging the shock on my face. "Is this some sort of sick joke?" I asked. "Now that's no way to treat someone you've just met now, is it?" the man said, still with a smile burnt on his face. I remained silent. Part of me wanted to believe that this was some sort of prank. But when the man's smile turned from happiness to a sick grin, I knew something sinister was happening. My fear turned into irritation as the man kept smiling and holding this limp person on the screen. I took several screenshots and told the man to give up this sick prank or else I'd report him as a nuisance to the police. But the man just kept smiling. Just as my hand was going to the escape button, the man stopped me. "Not so fast." "Are you really gonna try and talk your way out of this?" I asked the man angrily. The man continued with his crazed smile and put a piece of paper up to the screen. It was blurry at first, but I wiped my monitor and let his webcam refocus. I was in shock. My face went pale as I read the paper once again. It was my address. A shiver went up my spine. My adrenaline was pumping. I had no idea what to do next. Should I keep stalling him? Will the police even arrive in time? The man just started chuckling and giggling to himself. I quickly unplugged my computer and surveyed my room. I sprinted down the stairs and confirmed my front and back doors were locked. Some of my blinds were open, but there was no point in running to close them. I had no time to spare. For all I knew, my address could have been leaked for that whole entire conversation. I grabbed a knife from my kitchen and ran to the nearest bathroom. I threw whatever chair I had against the bathroom door and tried to block it closed. Things just kept going downhill from there. I grabbed my phone and called the police. The emergency operator told me that the police were caught up in other things as it was late on a Friday night, but they would try and send a unit my way as soon as possible due to the nature of the emergency. But while the operator was on the phone with me, I heard my back gate fling open. That gate was never used. It always remained locked. I asked the operator whether the cops had arrived at my house yet. She said the nearest unit was still about 5 to 10 minutes away. I then heard footsteps approaching my backyard. I knew I had one chance. It wouldn't take long for whoever this was to get into my house and eventually find me. I pondered my options for a second, but eventually came to a decision. I opened the bathroom window and leaped out of it. I landed in the least graceful way possible. The crunches of the leaves under my feet would definitely have alerted the intruder. It was now or never. I ran faster than I had ever had, the chills and shivers up my spine only fueling my stamina. I eventually jumped over my fence and onto the street. I ran towards the main road as fast as I could. My more logical side told me that I should have at least looked back to see if they came alone or how they even arrived at my house, but there was no going back now. After what seemed like several minutes of frantic sprinting, I finally arrived at an intersection. There were obviously no cars or people at this time at night, but at least it was in front of a traffic light with cameras and street lamps. I looked back to see if I was being followed, but the coast seemed clear enough. I finally mustered up the courage to walk back to my house and see if the police had arrived. Judging by the sounds of the sirens, they did. I explained to the cops everything that happened when I got there. I even showed them the screenshots. They managed to identify the man as someone who had just gotten out of jail on a petty vandalism charge. They never suspected him of doing anything like this. I asked them about the person in the mask and whether they were okay. They explained it to me, but tried to keep it in a neutral tone. The masked man's dimensions seemed to match up with someone who had gone missing not long ago. They were still unsure of whether the person was unconscious or dead in the video. The smiling man was logging my IP address the whole time. He somehow managed to trace those video packets to my house. The police were still trying to understand whether it was the man himself or someone else who came over to my house. Our exchange was then interrupted by one of the investigators handing us over a piece of paper in an evidence bag. The officer looked just as stumped as I did. "What is it?" I asked. The cop was hesitant to even show it to me at first. "Listen, this is my house, okay? You guys need to show me what you're looking at right now," I replied back angrily. The officer then showed me the piece of paper, and my heart sank. On the paper it read, "Fun meeting you," with a smiley face written at the end of it. When it comes to life, I've always considered myself a rather fortunate person. However, the story I'm about to tell you changed that permanently. I'm a college student, and at the time it was my second year there. I consider myself an unproblematic person. I just sort of do my thing and live a normal lifestyle. I had friends, decent grades, and a few hobbies. I was a really normal person. Knowing all this about myself, however, I never really expected traumatizing things to happen. Ordinary people like me usually don't attract negative attention or drama. It was the weekend after finals, and all of us were thrilled. Our semester was long and difficult. We were all ready for a break. My friends and I had just finished congratulating our upperclassmen friends. They were graduating that year. We chilled out with the seniors, said our goodbyes, and went back to my dorm. At the time, my room had a large monitor and speaker set. This meant that my friends and I could often watch videos together online or just do other stuff. This night in particular, however, we wanted to give Omegle a try. Omegle was a weird website. It was either comprised of young kids or old men showing their junk on camera. But sometimes, we met chill people or had some fun trolling weirdos back. In the room was me, my friends Sophia, Lucy, and Emily. We launched Omegle and started scrolling through people. At first, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It was just Emily and I scrolling through while Lucy and Sophia were in the background. We met a usual mixture of weirdos and cool people, but it just seemed like another night with the girls. At some point, however, we encountered a rather aged man. He wasn't exactly well groomed and seemed to be in a dingy room. I want to say he was close to 40, but none of this was exactly abnormal. He's just another creepy old man on the internet. The man surveyed his screen and started smiling oddly. "What's with that smile?" we asked. He looked around our room a little more and replied, "Oh, nothing, I'm just killing some time online." At this point, all of us were on the same page. We were all gonna think of weird and sarcastic things to say to him to make him uncomfortable. I mean, after all, Omegle was meant for trolling people. "Nice hair," Sophia remarked sarcastically. The man seemed to have a very patchy hair pattern and was mostly bald on his head. "You're a funny young lady," the man replied, "but I'm more focused on what's behind y'all." We looked behind us, and Lucy was in the back. Lucy was a very attractive young woman. Random men hitting on her was something all of us were just too used to at this point. Unalarmed by the man's behavior, we shot back with another sarcastic response. "You're interested in what's behind us? You mean the desk? Oh, it's just a regular desk. It came with the dorm. You into tables or something?" All of us started laughing at Emily's comment. The man, however, just smirked and continued his thought. "You gals are very funny, but I'm talking about the girl to the very back right." All of us just continued to chuckle. "Sorry, not interested," Lucy immediately replied. But the man just continued. "You're a young woman, you see. You've never had a real man. You don't know what actual romance is, but I can show you." All of us looked at each other blankly, and then burst into laughter. We've all had weird old men hit on us online, but this guy really thinks he has a chance with Lucy. When we looked back at the screen, the man looked furious. His initial smirk was completely gone. "You girls never understand, will you?" the man exclaimed. This just somehow fueled our laughter, and fueled the man's rage even more. He started going on about teaching her a lesson and making sure we understood he was serious. At this point, we were done messing with the man. We skipped to the next person, thinking about what a sore loser he was. We've met weirdos before, but this guy really couldn't handle rejection from some girl online. The next day came, and I got a call from Emily. Apparently there was a pretty decent-sized party commemorating the end of the year. It took place the night before move-out day as usual, and it seemed to be catching a lot of traction on social media. But this one was a bit different. Normally, students would find some sort of house or dorm to host these parties, but the past few parties which have been doing this have got the police called on them pretty quickly, so when the cops show up, the party shuts down. In order to prevent this, they were going to have a party in the woods, at a nearby campsite most likely. As sketchy as this seems, this wasn't actually abnormal at our university. My college is near a rather famous set of campsites. It's kind of close to the woods, and it was actually common for people to bring some lights and a speaker to the hiking trails away from the city to have parties. It was a great way of avoiding noise complaints and avoiding police. And considering this party was spreading through social media like a wildfire, we knew that there'd be a lot of other people there, so really nothing to worry about. Knowing that this had been done before, Lucy, Sophia, Emily, and I quickly got ready for the party. We kept laughing at the man from before. We messed with people all the time online, but his reaction was just priceless. We drove down to the forest and headed on the trail. It was late at night, but there was a lot of other people. We eventually got to the campsite, and there was already a fire going in one of the pits. There were a lot of people there, and music was already blasting. We all went in and started talking to people. Lucy broke off first, and met up with a man. He was tall and wore a gray sweater. The guy was pretty cute, and I trusted Lucy's instincts to be safe. After all, we were surrounded by a lot of people. There was nothing much the guy could do. As the rest of us ventured through the party, we split up a little and started to really lay back. I ended up talking to this cute guy. He went by Joey, and he overall seemed chill. We eventually exchanged numbers and socials. As the night raged on, it started to get late. I started to gather everyone back up so we could head back to our apartment. I didn't want to get there the next morning or anything. I got a hold of Sophie, and then Emily shortly after, but Lucy, she was nowhere to be found. I asked Joey if he'd seen her, but he had no clue where she was. Several more minutes go by of us looking through the party, and we still just couldn't find her. We tried texting and calling her various times, but her phone consistently went to voicemail. This was odd. Lucy would always consistently pick up, especially when it was us. We scrambled around even more, and there was still no sign of her. Things were starting to get actually scary. It was considerably late, and people were starting to leave the party, but despite the lower amount of people, we still couldn't get a hold of Lucy. I tried to keep calm, but Sophie and Emily were really starting to freak out. We wanted to assume that she'd gone to some dude's house, but that still didn't explain her not picking up the phone. After looking around the forest and asking people around a bit more, we still had no sign of her. I even tried contacting her other friends to see if she'd been back on campus, but from what they said, it really didn't seem like it. Sophie, Emily, and I reluctantly walked back to our car. We wanted to see if she was at least waiting for us there, but to our horror, she was not there either. We really didn't want to call the cops either, especially considering that we'd be snitching on ourselves for the party, but we honestly felt we were running out of options. In the end of the day, Lucy had mysteriously disappeared and was last spotted in the woods. This in itself sounded terrifying, and we needed help. I was the most sober, so I dropped Sophie and Emily back at the university and drove over to the police station. I filed a report at the police station, and during this time, Emily continued to search for Lucy at the university. As I told the police more and more of what happened, they started to realize that this could be serious. It deemed probable enough cause to start a full-on search for Lucy. There was nothing I could do, so I met back up with Sophie and Emily at the university. We tried our best to go to sleep. That next day, I got a call from the station. I frantically picked up to see if they had any news. I wanted to see where our friend was. What could have happened to her? Let's just say, My heart sank. Lucy was found dead in the woods with multiple stab wounds lathered across her body. Her body was found not far at all from the forest party. Police believe that she could have been dragged out in the woods in the dark, her screams muffled by the loud music and people. Sophie began to sob, and Emily and I just stood there, our faces pale with disbelief. The cops still hadn't found the culprit, but I felt I had a clue. I remember Lucy flirting with that tall man. I felt it had to be him. Another horrid day went by, and eventually I was asked to step into the station for a bit more questioning. It turns out they think they found their culprit. I was enraged. I was about to see the person that took my friend from me permanently. It hit me that I may or may not have been going to school with this man the whole time. That thought disgusted me, but somehow it was even worse than I thought. When they brought out the killer, it was the old man from Omegle. How did this man find us? How was any of this even happening? But that's when it struck me. During the Omegle call, Lucy had a name tag on from an event she attended prior. She was also wearing our school's sweatshirt. The cops believe the man managed to find her on social media and track down the party we were going to. He seems to have tracked down who liked and commented on the post, and surely Lucy did both of which. Rage and despair filled me from my feet to my head. This creep online who he messed with, he really lived up to his threats. I didn't even get to say goodbye to Lucy. I couldn't believe it. If there's anything I want you guys to get out of this, it's to be careful who you meet and what you share online. Unimaginable things can still happen.